Have you ever thought about why the calmest person in a crisis often wins while everyone else loses? Why does the person who creates chaos profit while those caught in the chaos suffer? Why is emotional control such a devastating advantage over those who can be emotionally manipulated? This video will change how you see conflict, emotion, and the invisible strategies that allow some people to profit from the very turbulence that destroys others. Today we're diving into Law 39 from the 48 Laws of Power: stir up waters to catch fish. But this isn't just about creating chaos or manipulating emotions. This is about understanding one of the most ruthless principles of power, that emotional turbulence creates opportunity for those who remain calm. That anger, fear, and confusion in others can be deliberately provoked and then exploited. That the person who can stir emotions while remaining emotionally detached gains massive advantage over those who react emotionally. Let me tell you a story that will reveal everything. In the 1500s, a French diplomat named Cardinal Richelieu became chief minister to King Louis XIII. The French nobility was powerful, factional, and constantly plotting against royal authority. They were skilled political operators who had maintained their independence for centuries. Richelieu needed to break their power but couldn't attack them directly without triggering unified aristocratic resistance. Instead, Richelieu employed a strategy of deliberate provocation. He would subtly insult one noble faction, making them angry. In their anger, they would react impulsively, plotting against him or making rash statements. Richelieu, remaining completely calm and calculating, would then use their emotional reactions as evidence of disloyalty. He'd show the king that these nobles were plotting treason. The angry nobles, having reacted emotionally, had given him exactly the ammunition he needed to destroy them legally. He repeated this pattern systematically. Provoke nobles into emotional reactions. Remain calm himself while they raged. Use their emotional turbulence against them. One by one, powerful noble families were destroyed not through direct attack but through their own emotional reactions to Richelieu's calculated provocations. Within 2 decades, he had broken the power of the French nobility while appearing to do nothing but defend the king against disloyal subjects. The brilliance wasn't the provocations themselves. Any fool can insult someone. The brilliance was the combination of strategic provocation with absolute emotional control. Richelieu stirred the waters deliberately, creating emotional turbulence in his targets. But he remained completely calm, completely rational, completely in control of himself. While his targets flailed in emotional chaos, he calmly exploited their reactions. He created the storm and then profited from it. This pattern repeats throughout history with such consistency that it reveals a fundamental principle of power. Emotional turbulence creates vulnerability. The person experiencing strong emotions makes mistakes, reveals information, acts impulsively, shows weaknesses. The person who can provoke these emotions while remaining emotionally calm can exploit every mistake, extract every piece of information, capitalize on every weakness. Emotional control versus emotional chaos is one of the most decisive advantages in any conflict. Now let me take you back 2 million years to understand why we're wired to be vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Our ancestors evolved in environments where emotional responses were adaptive. Anger prepared you to fight. Fear prepared you to flee. Both responses were life-saving when facing immediate physical threats. Natural selection strongly favored individuals who could generate intense emotions quickly and act on them immediately. But this same emotional reactivity creates vulnerability in social conflicts that aren't about immediate physical threats. When someone makes you angry, your anger doesn't help you. It clouds your judgment, makes you impulsive, causes you to reveal your intentions, creates mistakes you can be exploited for. The emotional system that saved your ancestors from predators now makes you vulnerable to social predators who understand how to trigger your emotions. Meanwhile, the ability to remain calm under emotional provocation is a relatively recent evolutionary development. It requires prefrontal cortex control over limbic emotional responses. It's cognitively demanding and doesn't come naturally. But in social conflicts, this emotional control is devastatingly advantageous. The person who can trigger your emotional responses while maintaining their own calm has you at a massive disadvantage. Your brain, right now, contains ancient emotional circuitry that can be triggered by the right provocations. These triggers were life-saving in ancestral environments but are exploitable vulnerabilities in modern social conflicts. Understanding this is the first step to defending against Law 39 and potentially deploying it yourself. Fast forward to ancient China, and we see this principle articulated explicitly in Sun Tzu's Art of War. Sun Tzu wrote extensively about provoking enemies into emotional reactions while maintaining your own calm. Insult proud generals to make them attack rashly. Create apparent opportunities to make greedy enemies expose themselves. Spread confusion to make anxious enemies reveal their positions. Always remain calm yourself while stirring emotions in enemies. The military context makes the principle clear. The general who can be provoked into anger will attack when attack is disadvantageous. The general who can be made fearful will retreat when holding position was optimal. The general who can be confused will make mistakes that reveal information or create vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, the general who remains emotionally controlled can exploit every emotional reaction in his opponent. But Sun Tzu understood this applied beyond military conflict. Any competitive situation where emotions can be stirred creates opportunity for the emotionally controlled competitor. Business negotiations, political conflicts, legal disputes, social competitions, anywhere that emotional reactions create vulnerabilities, Law 39 applies. The person who masters emotional provocation while maintaining emotional control dominates those who react emotionally. Now let me show you how this operates in modern business contexts, because corporate environments are perfect laboratories for watching Law 39 in action. The executive who can provoke competitors into emotional reactions while remaining calm gains decisive advantages in negotiations, strategy, and internal politics. Think about high-stakes negotiations. The negotiator who can make the other side angry, fearful, or confused while remaining calm themselves controls the negotiation. An angry opponent makes concessions they'll regret. A fearful opponent accepts unfavorable terms. A confused opponent can't think strategically. Meanwhile, the calm provocateur exploits every emotional reaction to extract maximum value. You see this in how skilled negotiators operate. They'll make provocative offers designed to trigger anger. They'll highlight risks designed to create fear. They'll present complex scenarios designed to create confusion. All while maintaining perfect composure themselves. When the other side reacts emotionally, they're already losing. Their emotional state prevents them from negotiating effectively while the calm provocateur maintains complete strategic clarity. The same principle operates in corporate politics. The executive who can make rivals angry, fearful, or confused while remaining calm causes those rivals to make career-destroying mistakes. The angry rival says things that can be used against them. The fearful rival makes defensive moves that reveal their insecurities. The confused rival asks questions that expose their lack of understanding. The calm provocateur remains in complete control, stirring emotions in others while maintaining perfect emotional discipline themselves. This creates a pattern you see constantly in corporate environments. The person who's always calm, always composed, always rational, they accumulate power while more emotional colleagues struggle. Not because they're actually more competent necessarily, but because their emotional control allows them to exploit others' emotional reactions. They're playing a different game, one where emotional turbulence in others creates opportunity for them. Understanding this means recognizing when someone is deliberately provoking your emotions. The colleague who makes comments designed to anger you. The competitor who highlights risks designed to scare you. The negotiator who presents complexity designed to confuse you. These aren't accidents. They're deliberate applications of Law 39. Your emotional reaction is exactly what they want because it gives them advantage. Now here's where this gets really dark, and I need you to pay close attention because this is the twist that changes everything. Law 39 means that deliberately causing emotional suffering in others can be strategically optimal. Making someone angry, making them afraid, making them confused, these cause genuine psychological distress. But if that distress creates strategic advantage, the ruthless operator will cause it deliberately and without remorse. Think about what this means at scale. In competitive environments, people are deliberately making each other emotionally turbulent for strategic gain. The boss who creates anxiety in employees to make them compliant. The politician who stirs fear in voters to gain support. The negotiator who makes counterparties angry to extract concessions. The social operator who confuses targets to manipulate them. All of this involves deliberately causing emotional suffering for personal advantage. This is deeply uncomfortable because it suggests that much of the emotional turbulence you experience isn't random or natural. It's being deliberately created by people who understand Law 39 and are using emotional manipulation as a strategic tool. They're stirring your waters to catch you as a fish. Your emotional reactions are their opportunity. It also suggests that being emotionally reactive makes you exploitable. Every time someone can provoke an emotional reaction from you, they gain strategic advantage. The more easily you react emotionally, the more vulnerable you are to those who understand how to trigger and exploit emotional reactions. Your emotional volatility is a weakness that sophisticated operators will identify and exploit systematically. This creates a brutal selection pressure in competitive environments. The emotionally reactive gradually get eliminated or marginalized because they're constantly being manipulated and outmaneuvered by those with better emotional control. The emotionally controlled gradually accumulate advantages because they can manipulate others while remaining invulnerable to manipulation themselves. Over time, this creates hierarchies where emotional control strongly correlates with power and success. Let me show you how Law 39 operates in legal and adversarial contexts, because courtrooms are pure distilled applications of this principle. Trial lawyers are trained explicitly in emotional manipulation. They know how to provoke witnesses into angry outbursts that make them look guilty or unreliable. They know how to create fear that causes witnesses to contradict themselves. They know how to create confusion that makes testimony seem unreliable. Think about how cross-examination works. The lawyer isn't just asking questions to get information. They're strategically provoking emotional reactions that undermine the witness's credibility. They'll ask insulting questions designed to make witnesses angry. They'll highlight scary scenarios designed to make witnesses fearful. They'll present complex hypotheticals designed to make witnesses confused. All while maintaining perfect professional composure themselves. When the witness reacts emotionally, when they get angry or defensive or confused, the jury perceives them as unreliable or guilty. The witness's emotional reaction is being used against them. Meanwhile, the lawyer who provoked the reaction maintains calm authority. The jury sees composed professional versus emotional witness. This perception shapes verdict more than the actual facts being discussed. The skilled witness understands Law 39 and maintains emotional control regardless of provocation. They answer calmly. They don't take bait. They refuse to react emotionally. This emotional control makes them credible and makes the lawyer's attempts at provocation look like bullying. But most witnesses don't have this training. They react emotionally to provocations, which is exactly what the lawyer wanted. You see the same dynamics in political debates. The candidate who can provoke opponents into angry or confused reactions while remaining calm themselves wins the debate regardless of policy substance. The audience remembers the emotional contrast, calm leader versus emotional opponent. This perception matters more than any policy details discussed. Understanding this means recognizing that adversarial contexts are often won or lost based on emotional control rather than facts or logic. The person who can be provoked into emotional reactions will lose to the person who remains calm and provokes effectively. This isn't because emotional reactions indicate you're wrong. It's because human psychology interprets emotional turbulence as weakness and calm composure as strength. Now let me take you into the specific techniques for stirring waters effectively, because this is a learnable skill rather than just natural manipulation ability. Understanding these techniques helps you both deploy them when strategically necessary and defend against them when they're used on you. First technique, identify emotional triggers. Everyone has topics, words, or situations that trigger strong emotional reactions. Past traumas, insecurities, strong values, identity issues. The effective provocateur identifies these triggers through observation and then deliberately activates them when strategic advantage requires emotional destabilization. Second technique, maintain plausible deniability. The provocation must be subtle enough that you can deny deliberately provoking. You're just asking questions or making observations. If accused of manipulation, you can act confused or hurt. This deniability is what allows repeated provocation without being called out as a manipulator. Third technique, escalate gradually. Don't go for maximum provocation immediately. Start with mild provocations and escalate based on response. This graduated approach makes the target feel they're reacting to accumulating pressure rather than realizing they're being deliberately manipulated through escalating provocation. Fourth technique, exploit emotional momentum. Once someone is in an emotional state, they're more susceptible to further emotional manipulation. Anger makes people more prone to further anger. Fear makes them more prone to further fear. Ride the emotional momentum you've created to push them into increasingly extreme reactions. Fifth technique, create emotional uncertainty. Mix provocations with apparent kindness or support. This creates confusion about your intentions, which itself is destabilizing. They can't tell if you're friend or enemy, which keeps them emotionally off balance and easier to manipulate. Sixth technique, remain visibly calm. The contrast between your calm and their emotional turbulence is part of the manipulation. Your calm makes their emotion seem excessive, which makes them question themselves and become even more destabilized. Your emotional control is both shield and weapon. These techniques aren't just theoretical. They're used constantly by skilled manipulators in business, politics, law, and personal relationships. Understanding them helps you recognize when they're being deployed against you, which is the first step in defense. Now let me show you the defense against Law 39, because if you don't learn to defend against emotional manipulation, you'll be perpetually vulnerable to those who master it. The defense requires developing emotional awareness and control that most people never achieve. First defense, recognize provocation attempts. When someone says or does something that triggers strong emotion, ask yourself, is this deliberate? Are they trying to provoke a reaction? This cognitive interrupt between provocation and reaction is crucial. It gives you time to choose your response rather than reacting automatically. Second defense, delay emotional response. When you feel strong emotion arising, deliberately pause before acting on it. Count to 10. Take deep breaths. Change location. Whatever works to create delay between feeling and action. This delay allows the emotional intensity to decrease and rational thinking to engage. Third defense, understand your triggers. Know what provokes you. Past traumas, insecurities, values, identities. When you know your triggers, you can recognize when they're being activated and guard against automatic reactions. Self-knowledge is protective armor against emotional manipulation. Fourth defense, practice emotional regulation. Meditation, therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques, whatever helps you develop the ability to experience emotions without being controlled by them. This is a skill that improves with practice. The more you practice noticing emotions without immediately acting on them, the better you get at emotional control. Fifth defense, reframe provocations. When provoked, consciously reinterpret what happened. Instead of "they insulted me," think "they're trying to provoke me." This reframing shifts your emotional response from anger at the insult to detached observation of manipulation attempt. The reframing itself provides emotional control. Sixth defense, respond strategically. When you must respond to provocation, respond in ways that serve your strategic interests rather than emotional impulses. Sometimes the strategic response is calm deflection. Sometimes it's direct confrontation. Sometimes it's ignoring completely. Choose based on strategy, not emotion. These defenses work but require constant practice. Your default is emotional reaction to provocation. Training yourself to recognize, delay, and choose strategic response instead requires significant effort. But this effort pays enormous dividends in competitive contexts where emotional manipulation is constant. Let me take you deeper into how Law 39 operates in intimate relationships, because emotional manipulation in personal contexts is often the most damaging and the hardest to defend against. The partner who can stir your emotions while remaining calm themselves gains control in the relationship regardless of other factors like love, commitment, or fairness. Think about how this manifests in romantic relationships. One partner learns which buttons to push to make the other angry, jealous, insecure, or fearful. They push these buttons strategically when they want something, when they want to deflect from their own behavior, or when they want to establish dominance. Meanwhile, they maintain calm composure, which makes the emotional partner look unstable and unreasonable. This creates a perverse dynamic. The partner who's being manipulated reacts emotionally to provocations. These emotional reactions are then used as evidence that they're the problem in the relationship. Look how angry you get. Look how insecure you are. Look how unreasonable you're being. The emotional reactions, which were deliberately provoked, become weapons used against the person experiencing them. The manipulated partner often doesn't realize they're being manipulated. They think they have anger problems or insecurity issues or emotional instability. They might seek therapy or try to change themselves. They don't recognize that their emotions are being deliberately stirred by someone who profits from their emotional turbulence. The manipulation is invisible to them because they're experiencing real emotions, not recognizing those emotions are being triggered strategically. This is one of the darkest applications of Law 39 because it happens in contexts of supposed intimacy and trust. The person you trust most, the person you're most vulnerable with, is the person who can most effectively stir your emotional waters. They know your deepest triggers, your worst fears, your strongest insecurities. If they choose to exploit this knowledge, they can manipulate you with devastating effectiveness. The defense in intimate relationships requires recognizing patterns. If you consistently feel emotionally unstable around someone who remains consistently calm, if provocations seem to happen strategically when the person wants something, if your emotional reactions are regularly used against you, these are signs of emotional manipulation. The pattern, not individual incidents, is what reveals the manipulation. Once recognized, you must decide whether the relationship can be salvaged or should be ended. Sometimes the person doesn't realize they're manipulating and can change behavior when it's pointed out. Sometimes the manipulation is so ingrained or intentional that the relationship is irreparably toxic. Either way, recognition is the first step toward protection or exit. Now let me show you how Law 39 operates in mass contexts like media and propaganda, because emotional manipulation at scale is how public opinion gets shaped and how populations get controlled. Media organizations and political movements understand how to stir emotional waters in entire populations to profit from the resulting turbulence. Think about how news media operates. They're not just reporting events. They're selecting, framing, and presenting events in ways designed to trigger specific emotional responses. Fear, anger, outrage, these emotions drive engagement. People who are emotionally turbulent consume more content, share more, participate more. The media stirs emotional waters deliberately because calm people don't engage as much with media. The individual consumer doesn't realize their emotions are being manipulated. They think they're responding to events. Actually, they're responding to carefully selected and framed presentations designed to trigger emotional responses. The same events presented differently would create different emotions or no strong emotion at all. The presentation, not the events themselves, is what creates the emotional turbulence. Politicians use the same technique at scale. They identify issues that trigger strong emotions in their target demographics. They frame those issues in ways that maximize emotional intensity. They're deliberately stirring emotional waters in entire populations. The emotionally turbulent population is easier to mobilize, easier to direct, easier to control. The calm, rational population is harder to manipulate politically. This creates a society where vast numbers of people are perpetually emotionally turbulent, constantly angry or afraid or outraged. They're experiencing real emotions, but those emotions are being deliberately cultivated by media and political operators who profit from emotional turbulence. The stirring is systematic, sophisticated, and largely invisible to those whose emotions are being stirred. The defense at mass level requires media literacy and emotional awareness. Recognize that media is designed to provoke emotions. Question your emotional responses. Ask whether the framing is designed to make you feel this way. Seek out calmer, more factual sources. Limit exposure to emotionally manipulative media. Cultivate the ability to engage with information without being emotionally manipulated by presentation. This is difficult because the entire information ecosystem is optimized for emotional manipulation. Algorithm-driven feeds show you content that provokes strong emotions because that drives engagement. The economic incentives of attention economy favor emotional manipulation over calm information delivery. Swimming against this current requires constant conscious effort. Let me take you into how Law 39 operates in competitive sports and games, because this reveals the principle in its purest form without the moral complications of interpersonal manipulation. In sports, provoking opponents emotionally while maintaining your own calm is a recognized and accepted tactic. Think about trash talk in basketball. Players deliberately insult opponents to make them angry. Angry players make mistakes, take bad shots, commit fouls. Meanwhile, the calm trash talker maintains perfect focus and exploits every mistake the angry opponent makes. This is Law 39 deployed openly and without pretense. Everyone knows it's happening, but it works anyway because emotional control is difficult even when you know you're being manipulated. You see this in tennis with players who deliberately slow their pace to frustrate impatient opponents. In soccer with players who embellish contact to get opponents carded for aggressive fouls. In combat sports with fighters who taunt opponents into emotional fighting rather than strategic fighting. The provocateur remains calm and strategic while the provoked opponent becomes emotional and makes mistakes. The sports context is instructive because it shows that even when manipulation is obvious, even when you know someone is trying to provoke you emotionally, it still works if you haven't developed sufficient emotional control. Knowing you're being manipulated isn't enough. You must be able to recognize the manipulation and not react emotionally despite recognizing it. This requires a level of emotional regulation most people never achieve. This suggests that defending against Law 39 requires not just awareness but actual emotional control capacity. Awareness tells you you're being manipulated. Emotional control allows you to not react emotionally even when you know manipulation is occurring. Both are necessary. Awareness without control still leaves you vulnerable. Control without awareness means you might not recognize manipulation until you've already reacted. Now let me show you how Law 39 operates in organizational change and power transitions, because moments of change are optimal for stirring waters and exploiting the resulting chaos. When organizations are restructuring, when leadership is changing, when strategies are shifting, these transitions create natural uncertainty and anxiety. The sophisticated operator amplifies this emotional turbulence and exploits it. Think about how this works during corporate reorganizations. Some executives will deliberately create additional uncertainty beyond what the reorganization itself creates. Unclear communications, contradictory signals, rumors allowed to spread. This amplifies anxiety and confusion. In this heightened emotional state, people make poor decisions, reveal their true allegiances, expose their insecurities. The calm executive who created the chaos exploits all of this. They'll approach anxious employees with apparent stability and support, gaining loyalty. They'll identify insecure colleagues and either recruit them or eliminate them based on utility. They'll use the chaos to settle old scores, remove rivals, and consolidate power. All while appearing to be a calm voice of reason in turbulent times. They created the turbulence specifically to create these opportunities. You see this pattern in every major organizational change. Some people are genuinely trying to manage the transition smoothly. Others are deliberately amplifying chaos because chaos creates opportunity. The waters are already stirred by the change itself. The sophisticated operator stirs them further and then catches fish while everyone else is just trying to survive the turbulence. The defense is recognizing when someone is amplifying rather than calming organizational turbulence. Are they providing clarity or creating confusion? Are they reducing anxiety or increasing it? Are they helping people navigate change or using change as cover for personal agenda? These questions reveal whether someone is managing change or exploiting it through deliberate stirring of waters. Let me take you into the psychological principle that makes Law 39 so effective. Emotional arousal narrows attention and reduces cognitive capacity. When you're experiencing strong emotion, your thinking becomes simplified and focused on the emotional trigger. You lose peripheral awareness. You can't think strategically. You're cognitively impaired compared to your calm baseline. This is why provoked emotions create such decisive advantages. The person experiencing anger, fear, or confusion is temporarily less intelligent, less strategic, less capable than they normally are. Meanwhile, the calm provocateur operates at full cognitive capacity. It's like they've handicapped their opponent. The emotional person is playing at reduced capability while the calm person plays at full capability. Research on decision-making under emotional arousal confirms this. Angry people make riskier decisions and accept worse deals. Fearful people make overly conservative decisions and miss opportunities. Confused people make random decisions and are easily led. All of these degraded decision-making patterns can be exploited by someone who understands how to trigger emotions and remain calm themselves. This suggests that emotional control isn't just about composure or maturity. It's about maintaining your cognitive capabilities in contexts where others are being cognitively impaired by emotional arousal. Your emotional control keeps you at full intelligence while others are temporarily reduced. This cognitive advantage is what allows exploitation of their emotional turbulence. The sophistication of Law 39 becomes clear when you understand this cognitive dimension. You're not just making people uncomfortable emotionally. You're temporarily making them less intelligent and strategic. Then you're exploiting their reduced capacity to extract concessions, gain information, or create other advantages. It's a form of temporary cognitive warfare where emotions are the weapons. Now let me show you how Law 39 operates in the context of information warfare and disinformation, because stirring emotional waters at scale through information manipulation is one of the most powerful applications of this law in the modern era. State actors, political movements, and various organizations deliberately create emotional turbulence through strategic information manipulation. Think about how disinformation campaigns work. They're not primarily about making people believe false facts. They're about creating emotional turbulence that prevents rational thinking. The disinformation is designed to make people angry, afraid, or confused. Once in these emotional states, people become less capable of distinguishing true from false information. They become more susceptible to further manipulation. The operators running disinformation campaigns remain emotionally detached from the content they're creating. They don't care whether the information is true or false. They care about what emotional response it creates and how that emotional response can be exploited. They're stirring emotional waters systematically across entire populations and then exploiting the resulting cognitive impairment. You see this in how fake news spreads. Emotionally charged false information spreads faster than accurate calm information because emotional arousal prompts sharing. People share what makes them angry or afraid without checking accuracy. The disinformation exploits emotional reflexes to spread itself. The operators understand this and design content specifically to trigger sharing emotions. The defense requires recognizing when information is designed to provoke emotion rather than inform. If something makes you immediately angry or afraid, pause before sharing or acting on it. Check sources. Seek confirming information. Wait for the emotional arousal to subside. This cognitive discipline prevents you from being a vector for disinformation that's stirring emotional waters. But this defense is difficult because the volume of emotionally manipulative information is overwhelming. Your information environment is filled with content designed to provoke emotions. Maintaining constant vigilance and emotional control is exhausting. This is why information warfare through emotional manipulation is so effective. It's difficult to defend against sustained emotional provocation. Let me take you into how Law 39 interacts with trauma and psychological wounds, because people with unresolved trauma are especially vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Their trauma responses can be triggered more easily, and these triggers create extreme emotional turbulence that sophisticated manipulators can exploit ruthlessly. Think about someone with abandonment trauma. A manipulator who recognizes this can deliberately create situations that trigger abandonment fears. The trauma response creates intense emotional turbulence. The manipulator remains calm and offers apparent security, which creates dependency. They're exploiting the person's trauma to create control over them. Or someone with shame-based trauma. A manipulator can trigger shame responses through subtle criticism or exposure. The shame creates intense emotional turbulence and desire to hide or compensate. The manipulator exploits this by offering acceptance conditional on compliance. The traumatized person becomes controlled through their own trauma responses. This is one of the most unethical applications of Law 39 because it exploits genuine psychological wounds for personal advantage. The person experiencing trauma responses isn't just emotionally turbulent, they're suffering genuine psychological distress. Deliberately triggering trauma responses is causing real harm for strategic benefit. The defense requires trauma healing work. Therapy, EMDR, internal family systems, whatever helps resolve or manage trauma responses. The more healed your trauma, the less vulnerable you are to manipulators who would exploit it. This isn't just about emotional health, it's about protection from exploitation. Unresolved trauma is a vulnerability that will be exploited by those sophisticated enough to recognize it. Now let me address the ethical questions around Law 39 directly, because this law involves deliberately causing emotional suffering for strategic gain. Is this ever ethical? Can emotional manipulation be justified? These are uncomfortable questions without clear answers. In competitive contexts like business negotiations or legal proceedings, emotional manipulation is generally accepted as part of the game. Everyone knows the rules include attempts at emotional provocation. Maintaining emotional control is part of expected competence. Using emotional manipulation in these contexts is ethically gray but socially accepted. In contexts of trust like intimate relationships or friendships, emotional manipulation is clearly unethical. You're exploiting trust and intimacy to cause harm. The person has made themselves vulnerable to you, and you're weaponizing that vulnerability. This betrays the relationship's foundations and causes genuine psychological damage. In contexts involving trauma or severe power imbalances, emotional manipulation is severely unethical. You're exploiting genuine psychological wounds or situations where the person cannot effectively defend themselves. This is exploitation of the vulnerable and causes serious harm. The ethical line is roughly, emotional manipulation is acceptable in contexts where both parties understand it's part of the competitive dynamic and have relatively equal capacity to employ and defend against it. It becomes unethical when there's asymmetry of power, vulnerability, or understanding that makes the manipulation exploitative rather than competitive. But even this ethical framework is uncomfortable because it acknowledges that causing emotional suffering is sometimes acceptable if it's part of an accepted competitive context. This reveals how much of ethics is contextual rather than absolute. The same action, causing emotional turbulence for strategic gain, is ethical in some contexts and deeply unethical in others. Let me show you one extended final case study that demonstrates Law 39 at master level across multiple dimensions. In the 1930s and 40s, Winston Churchill faced the challenge of maintaining British resistance against Nazi Germany while also managing complex relationships with allies and domestic political opponents. Churchill understood emotional manipulation at the highest level. He would deliberately provoke Hitler into emotional rages through speeches and actions, knowing Hitler's emotional volatility made him a worse strategic decision-maker. He stirred American emotions toward support for Britain through carefully crafted emotional appeals. He managed domestic political opposition by remaining calm under their attacks while occasionally provoking them into looking unreasonable. Throughout World War II, Churchill faced enormous pressure, constant danger, and repeated setbacks. But he maintained remarkable emotional control publicly, projecting calm determination even during Britain's darkest moments. This public emotional control was itself strategic, preventing panic and maintaining morale while privately he worked with full awareness of how desperate Britain's situation often was. What makes Churchill's application of Law 39 interesting is that he used it primarily in service of what most would consider just causes: defeating Nazi Germany, maintaining democracy, protecting freedom. He stirred emotional waters deliberately, he exploited opponents' emotional reactions, he maintained strategic calm while creating turbulence in others. But he deployed these manipulative techniques toward ends that history judges positively. This demonstrates that Law 39 is a morally neutral tool. The ethics depend entirely on what purposes you deploy it for, not whether you use it at all. Churchill used emotional manipulation extensively, but in service of defeating totalitarianism. That doesn't make the manipulation less manipulative, but it makes it ethically defensible in ways that emotional manipulation for purely personal gain would not be. So as we close this exploration of Law 39, understand that this law reveals one of the most uncomfortable truths about power, that emotional control creates decisive advantages that often matter more than competence, resources, or circumstances. The person who can stir others' emotions while maintaining their own calm will consistently defeat more capable opponents who lack this emotional mastery. You must decide whether to deploy this law and how to defend against it. Deploying it requires learning to provoke emotions strategically while maintaining your own emotional control. This is psychologically demanding and ethically complicated. Defending against it requires developing emotional awareness and control that allows you to recognize manipulation and not react emotionally even when provoked. Most people will experience Law 39 primarily as targets rather than operators. Others will deliberately stir your emotional waters to catch you as a fish. Your defense is emotional control that makes you uncatchable. When you can be provoked, you're vulnerable. When you maintain calm regardless of provocation, you're protected. Stir up waters to catch fish. But remember that stirred waters can also drown those who stir them if they lose their own balance. The master of this law maintains perfect emotional control while creating turbulence in others. Lose that control, and you become victim of your own tactics. But let me take you even deeper into the mechanics of emotional manipulation, because there are advanced applications that separate amateur provocateurs from true masters of this law. The most sophisticated level involves creating emotional dependency where the target becomes addicted to the emotional states you create in them, making them easier to control long-term. Think about how this works psychologically. When you consistently provoke strong emotions in someone, then provide relief or resolution, you create an emotional roller coaster. The target experiences intense negative emotions followed by relief. This pattern is psychologically addictive. They become dependent on you for the relief even though you're the one who created the distress in the first place. This is how abusive relationships maintain their hold. The abuser creates intense negative emotions through criticism, anger, or withdrawal. Then they provide relief through affection, apology, or attention. The victim becomes addicted to the relief, which makes them tolerate increasing levels of abuse to get those moments of relief. They're trapped in an emotional cycle where the person hurting them is also the only source of comfort from that hurt. The same dynamic operates in less extreme contexts. The boss who creates constant anxiety through criticism and impossible demands, then occasionally provides praise or approval. Employees become desperate for those moments of approval, working harder and tolerating worse conditions to get them. The boss has created emotional dependency through systematic stirring of anxious waters followed by strategic calming. Or the friend who creates drama and emotional intensity, then positions themselves as the one who can provide stability and support through the chaos they created. The target becomes emotionally dependent on the friend even though the friend is the source of much of their emotional turbulence. They're caught in a cycle where their emotional stabilizer is also their emotional destabilizer. This advanced application of Law 39 is particularly insidious because the target doesn't recognize the pattern. They experience real distress and real relief. They don't see that both are being manufactured by the same person for control purposes. The emotional dependency feels like genuine connection rather than manipulation. Now let me show you how Law 39 operates in the context of group dynamics and how stirring emotional waters in groups creates different opportunities than stirring individual emotions. When you create emotional turbulence in a group, you can exploit the group's dynamics and divisions in ways impossible with individuals. Think about how this works in organizational settings. Someone deliberately creates conflict between departments or teams. Maybe they share information selectively to create misunderstandings. Maybe they make comments that play to existing tensions. Maybe they frame situations to make groups blame each other. The resulting conflict creates opportunities. While groups are fighting each other, they're not paying attention to what the manipulator is doing. The conflict distracts from other agendas. It exhausts people emotionally and politically. It creates situations where the manipulator can position themselves as the reasonable mediator, gaining influence with all sides. They stir the conflict specifically to create these opportunities. You see this in how skilled political operators manage coalitions. They'll deliberately create small conflicts within their coalition to keep members from uniting against them. They'll stir tensions between potential rivals to prevent them from allying. They'll create enough conflict that everyone is too busy managing disputes to challenge the person actually controlling things. The chaos serves control. The same principle operates in families where one member creates drama and conflict between other family members. While everyone is fighting, the drama creator occupies the center of attention and controls family dynamics through the chaos they create. Family gatherings become about managing the dramatic member rather than addressing real issues. The emotional turbulence serves the person creating it. Defending against group-level water-stirring requires recognizing when conflicts seem artificially amplified or when information flows seem designed to create misunderstanding. Ask who benefits from the conflict. Look for patterns where the same person seems to be involved in multiple conflicts without being clearly on any side. These are signs of deliberate stirring of group waters. Let me take you into how Law 39 operates across different time scales and how the tempo of emotional manipulation matters strategically. Rapid emotional provocation creates different effects than slow, sustained emotional pressure. Understanding timing is crucial for both deployment and defense. Rapid provocation, creating sudden intense emotional reactions, is useful for forcing quick decisions before rational thinking can engage. The target experiences a spike of emotion and reacts impulsively. This is effective in negotiations where you want someone to agree quickly before they fully think through implications. The emotional spike bypasses their analytical process. Sustained pressure, gradually increasing emotional turbulence over time, is useful for wearing down resistance and creating chronic stress that degrades decision-making capacity. The target becomes emotionally exhausted, which makes them more compliant and less capable of resisting. This is effective in situations where you want long-term control rather than immediate compliance. Intermittent provocation, alternating between stirring emotions and allowing calm, is useful for creating unpredictability that keeps targets off balance. They never know when the next emotional storm is coming, which creates chronic anxiety. This is effective for maintaining control over people who might resist if patterns were predictable. The sophisticated operator varies tempo based on strategic goals. Sometimes rapid strikes for immediate gains. Sometimes sustained pressure for breaking resistance. Sometimes intermittent patterns for maintaining chronic anxiety. The variation itself prevents targets from adapting or developing effective defenses. They can't predict when emotional manipulation will occur or what form it will take. Defending against different tempos requires different strategies. Rapid provocation requires immediate recognition and delay tactics. Sustained pressure requires building emotional resilience and finding external support. Intermittent provocation requires maintaining baseline calm regardless of whether storms are currently happening. All require awareness that tempo is being manipulated strategically. Now let me show you how Law 39 operates in the context of social media and digital communication, because these platforms have created unprecedented opportunities for emotional manipulation at scale. The architecture of social media is designed to stir emotional waters and exploit the resulting engagement. Think about how platform algorithms work. They amplify content that creates strong emotional reactions because emotional arousal drives engagement. Angry content gets shared more. Fearful content gets clicked more. confusing content gets commented on more. The algorithms don't care about truth or value. They care about emotional response because that's what maximizes platform usage. This means everyone using social media is constantly being emotionally manipulated by algorithms designed to stir their waters. The content you see is selected specifically to provoke emotions that keep you engaged. You're experiencing real emotions, but those emotions are being farmed by platforms that profit from your emotional turbulence. You're the fish being caught by waters the platform stirred. Individual actors exploit this too. Influencers, activists, politicians, they all understand that emotional content performs better. They deliberately create content designed to anger, frighten, or confuse their target audiences. The emotional reactions drive engagement, which the algorithms reward with more reach, which creates more emotional manipulation. It's a feedback loop where emotional manipulation gets systematically amplified. The defense requires recognizing that your digital environment is optimized for emotional manipulation. Every platform wants you emotionally aroused because that drives the engagement they monetize. Consuming social media means subjecting yourself to constant attempts at emotional manipulation. Limiting exposure, curating feeds carefully, and maintaining awareness of manipulation attempts all help reduce vulnerability. But complete defense is nearly impossible because the manipulation is built into the platform architecture. You can't use social media without being subject to emotional manipulation. The only complete defense is not using these platforms, which has its own costs in modern society. Most people must accept some level of exposure to emotional manipulation as the price of digital participation. Let me take you into how Law 39 operates in sales and marketing, because creating emotional turbulence in potential customers is a core technique for driving purchases. The calm, rational customer rarely buys impulsively. The emotionally turbulent customer is far more likely to make immediate purchases without fully considering alternatives. Think about how high-pressure sales tactics work. Time pressure creates anxiety. Scarcity claims create fear of missing out. Social proof creates fear of being left behind. Complex pricing creates confusion. All of these are deliberate attempts to stir emotional waters that make rational decision-making difficult. The emotional customer buys more and negotiates less effectively. Or consider how advertising creates emotional turbulence. It highlights problems you didn't know you had, creating anxiety. It shows idealized lives you don't have, creating dissatisfaction. It presents solutions as urgent and necessary, creating fear of inadequacy. You're being emotionally manipulated into wanting products you didn't want before the manipulation began. The most sophisticated marketing doesn't just stir emotions randomly. It creates specific emotional journeys designed to culminate in purchase decisions. First, create dissatisfaction or anxiety. Then present the product as relief or solution. Then create urgency through scarcity or time limits. Then provide easy purchase mechanisms before rational thinking can engage. Every step is calculated emotional manipulation. The defense requires recognizing when your emotions are being manipulated to drive purchase decisions. If you feel sudden urgency to buy something, pause and question where that urgency came from. If you feel anxious about not having something, question whether that anxiety existed before being exposed to marketing. If you feel confused by pricing or options, recognize that confusion might be deliberate. Most effective is implementing cooling-off periods for purchases. Never buy anything significant immediately upon first wanting it. Wait 24 hours, 72 hours, a week. This delay allows emotional manipulation effects to fade and rational analysis to engage. Many purchases you feel urgent about will no longer seem necessary after the emotional manipulation has worn off. Now let me address the relationship between Law 39 and personal boundaries, because people with weak boundaries are especially vulnerable to emotional manipulation while those with strong boundaries are naturally more protected. Boundaries are essentially rules about what emotional states others are allowed to create in you. Think about what strong boundaries look like in practice. You recognize when someone is trying to make you angry, and you refuse to get angry. You recognize when someone is trying to make you afraid, and you refuse to get afraid. Think about what strong boundaries look like in practice. You recognize when someone is trying to make you angry, and you refuse to get angry. You recognize when someone is trying to make you afraid, and you refuse to get afraid. You recognize when someone is trying to confuse you, and you insist on clarity. Strong boundaries mean you control your emotional state rather than allowing others to control it through manipulation. Weak boundaries mean you absorb and react to whatever emotional manipulation is directed at you. Someone provokes anger and you get angry. Someone triggers fear and you get fearful. Someone creates confusion and you get confused. You're emotionally permeable, which makes you easy to manipulate through stirred waters. Your emotional state is controlled externally rather than internally. Developing strong boundaries requires practice asserting control over your emotional states. This means recognizing manipulation attempts and refusing to have the emotional reaction being provoked. It means being comfortable with others' disapproval when you won't react as they want. It means prioritizing your emotional stability over social harmony when someone is trying to destabilize you. Strong boundaries don't mean you never feel emotions. They mean you feel emotions you choose based on your assessment rather than emotions others provoke through manipulation. You might get angry when anger serves your purposes, but you won't get angry just because someone tried to make you angry. You maintain agency over your emotional life rather than having it controlled by skilled manipulators. Let me show you one more extended case study that demonstrates both deployment and defense of Law 39 at the highest level. During the Cold War, the relationship between the United States and Soviet Union involved constant attempts by both sides to create emotional turbulence in the other while maintaining their own strategic calm. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a perfect example. The Soviets created emotional turbulence by secretly placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, creating fear and anger in the American leadership. But Kennedy and his advisors maintained remarkable emotional control despite the provocations. They responded strategically rather than emotionally, implementing a naval blockade while keeping diplomatic channels open. Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, was attempting to provoke an emotional American overreaction that would justify further Soviet actions or make America look like an aggressor. Kennedy refused to provide that overreaction. Meanwhile, Kennedy created emotional turbulence for Khrushchev by publicly exposing the missiles and creating international pressure. Both leaders were attempting Law 39 on each other. The crisis resolved because both sides maintained enough emotional control to negotiate despite being under enormous pressure and being actively manipulated by the other side. If either had lost emotional control and reacted to provocations rather than responding strategically, nuclear war might have resulted. This is Law 39 at the highest stakes possible, where emotional control versus turbulence literally meant the difference between peace and nuclear holocaust. What this case reveals is that at the highest levels of strategic competition, everyone understands Law 39 and is attempting to deploy it. The advantage goes not to whoever uses it, because everyone is using it, but to whoever maintains better emotional control under manipulation attempts. Both sides were stirring waters and being stirred. The side that maintained better calm in the stirred waters was the side that achieved better outcomes. So as we truly close this exploration of Law 39, understand that emotional manipulation is one of the most powerful and most ethically complicated tools in the arsenal of power. It works because humans are emotional creatures whose emotions can be triggered and whose thinking degrades under emotional arousal. Those who master emotional control while learning to provoke emotions in others gain decisive advantages. You must develop emotional awareness and control that allows you to recognize when your emotions are being manipulated and to maintain strategic calm despite provocations. This is difficult, lifelong work. Your default is emotional reactivity to provocations. Training yourself to recognize manipulation and choose strategic responses requires enormous effort and constant vigilance. At the same time, you must decide whether and how to deploy emotional manipulation yourself. In competitive contexts where it's accepted and both sides are attempting it, using Law 39 is strategically necessary. In contexts of trust or vulnerability, using it is unethical exploitation. The line isn't always clear, which means you must make moral judgments about when stirring others' emotional waters is acceptable versus exploitative. What's certain is that Law 39 will be used on you throughout your life. Media, marketing, politics, relationships, organizations, all will attempt to stir your emotional waters for their benefit. Your only protection is emotional awareness and control. When you can be provoked, you're vulnerable. When you maintain calm strategic thinking despite provocations, you're protected and potentially powerful. Stir up waters to catch fish. Recognize when your waters are being stirred. Maintain calm in stirred waters. These are the 3 levels of mastering Law 39. Deploy it consciously and ethically. Defend against it constantly and skillfully. Maintain your emotional center regardless of turbulence around or within you. That's the complete teaching of Law 39. That's everything.